Back when Breath of the Wild first released, one of the most widely debated topics amongst the community was figuring out exactly where this game placed within the Zelda timeline. We knew that it had to take place at the end of one of the three splits, but given how much in-game evidence there was that referenced each of the three timelines near equally, fans could never come to a unanimous conclusion on which one the game placed in. But after months of theorizing, Nintendo officially put an end to the debate by stating that this game didn't belong to a single set one, as it happened so far ahead in the future that it could have realistically took place in any of them. And this was a very respectable decision, as I understand how they wanted Breath of the Wild to stand out from the other games in the series by forming its own storyline, instead of relying on the past tropes in the series. But there is one thing that has to be taken into consideration here. Back when Breath of the Wild was first made, it was originally just meant to be a standalone, one-and-done sort of project. The idea of making a sequel for it wasn't even conceptualized until way after the game launched, as they just had so many unique ideas for DLC that they thought it would be best to just make a second game. And just by rewatching the trailer for its sequel, there are a lot of things within it that heavily call back to the past storyline way more than the first game, specifically with the reappearance of Ganondorf and how heavily his character connects to the events of the past games. This almost makes me wonder, could Breath of the Wild 2 be Nintendo's attempt at connecting the new storyline to the old, and therefore don't both of the games an official timeline placement after all? In order to answer this properly, we need to take a deeper dive into Ganondorf's character from the most recent trailer. Although there are a lot of theories going around about exactly what his role is in this situation, there is one thing that I can say for certain, and that is how his design almost perfectly resembles the version from Twilight Princess. Everything from his clothing, figure, and even his headpiece is almost perfectly recreated in the new game. But by far the most interesting thing about his Breath of the Wild reappearance is the giant wound that he has on his chest, which is in the same exact place as where he was stabbed by Link in Twilight Princess. The connections here just seem way too deliberate to be just a coincidence, so I think there is a definite reason to believe that both of the Ganondorfs are the same exact person, and not just a reincarnation of the past. However, the only tricky part is figuring out exactly how Ganondorf got from here to his most recent form. But just by using the few major details and plot points between the two games, there is a probable series of events we can use to make sense of it all. You see, after Ganondorf was defeated at the end of Twilight Princess, the people of Hyrule probably knew that if he was just simply killed off or executed, that he would be able to reincarnate years later and just cause future problems. However, if they locked him away in a stasis where his body would be lifeless but not completely dead, that they would never have to deal with him reincarnating again. So the crypt that we saw in the newest trailer was likely where they put him after Twilight Princess, and the green hand was likely the magic used by the hero to seal him away. But after a long amount of time, this seal started to wear off gradually, to the point where he was able to excrete his malice from the wound, just like we saw him doing in the newest trailer. This malice would eventually be used to conjure up a proxy form, Calamity Ganon, to attack Hyrule while his body is still under stasis. However, unaware of the kingdom's technological prowess at the time, was immediately pushed back and sealed away upon summon. Knowing of his creation's defeat, Ganondorf knew that he would have to plan his next attack more carefully, and corrupting the kingdom's technology would be his next best option. Although it took him another 10,000 years, he was finally able to garner up enough malice to do this, and the patient Ganon was finally able to send the state of the kingdom in despair, for at least the time being. However, after the new Calamity Ganon was defeated at the end of Breath of the Wild, it's assumed that the seal placed upon him thousands of years ago was even weaker than before, and was able to quickly conjure up even more malice. This is probably when Link and Zelda caught wind of this and started searching for the location of Calamity Ganon's source, which leads us perfectly into the events of the trailer. Although this rendition of what could have happened between the two games is rather plausible, there is only one massive roadblock in our way that prevents most of this from becoming true, and that is the timeline placement of Four Swords Adventures. You see, after Twilight Princess, Ganon does actually make another appearance in the final game of the Child timeline, which would mean that the theory of him being locked underground this whole time would become untrue. However, it definitely is possible that they might move this game to a different timeline in order for this to work. Besides, Four Swords Adventures doesn't have a specific need or reason to be in Child, as if it was moved to the Downfall, it would basically have no drastic effects on the timeline. The only reason why I think this game was placed in Child to begin with is because they didn't want to have a timeline with just 2 games in it, as it would look better to have the 3 splits more equal in length. This wouldn't be the first time that the devs move games around in the timeline either, as last year they actually moved Link's Awakening's timeline placement to after the events of the Oracle games instead of before. Although this change did not have much of an effect on the storyline, it's still proof that this sort of thing can be done. Besides, despite Breath of the Wild having callbacks to all 3 of the timelines, most of the structural ones such as the Bridge of Hylia, Arbiter's Grounds, and even the castle itself all correctly reference the child timeline, while there are basically no other structures in this game that reference the other 2 splits. This is one of the initial reasons why I originally thought that this game was in the child timeline when it came out, and this could also still be proof that the developers had the child timeline in mind when developing the game's world. However, after developing the game's narrative more, they decided to keep the story more ambiguous to the past events, and the only thing left over in the final product were all the structural callbacks to that timeline. If all this turns out to be true though, I think this would be a perfect way to tie the narrative of Breath of the Wild storyline with the past games. They wouldn't even have to rewrite or change anything about Breath of the Wild to make this work, as its story is ambiguous enough to make timeline adjustments malleable, and the many existing connections this game already has to the child timeline would make for a natural transition. After all, the child timeline is meant to be the core timeline of Zelda, while the adult and Dawnfall ones are meant to be more so spin-offs, so it does make sense that Nintendo would try to flesh out its main storyline even further. But with that said, what do you guys think about this theory? I also have some other Breath of the Wild 2 related theories in the playlist linked in the description below, so be sure to check them out as well. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. A huge shout out to my amazing patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you would like to help me out here for as little as $1 a month, all the info can be found in the description below. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.